Hey guys, my name is Matimio, and now that the Naval Strike DLC has launched and I've had many hours to play on them, I wanted to give my impressions on them because honestly, I was a little skeptical when I first heard about this DLC. Like, the prospect of having maps that were completely focused around water and boat combat was a little worrisome. I thought that there wasn't going to be a lot of variety. I thought that this was going to be maybe a gimmick on DICE's part. I mean, they're known for their gimmicks. The AC-130, they've had other DLCs in the past that didn't really live up to a lot of expectation. But after playing for a lot of hours now, it's safe to say that this might be one of the best DLCs that DICE has done in a very long time, and surely for Battlefield 4. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Carrier Assault. This was one of my favorite game modes back in Battlefield 2142. It had that great mix of conquest and rush, offense and defense. It had a lot of great dynamics to it, and I was very curious to see how it was going to be transferred on over into Battlefield 4 and if it was going to work. And for the most part, I would say it's been a huge success so far. Like, every single match I've had has been an absolute blast. Like, I've had some epic moments on offense and defense, trying to defend our carrier, going over and taking out theirs. Like, it's incredibly fun. The one thing I'm not completely sold on, though, is the ability for you to parachute down onto an enemy carrier once it reaches the 50% mark. Like, I get what DICE was going for. They wanted to keep the action fast-paced. They wanted to make it so that you had a quick way to get to the enemy's carrier, and I understand that. Like, I understand they're trying to sell this to a certain demographic, and they want to keep that fast-paced action, but at the same time, it completely takes away from one of the large aspects from Battlefield 21-2's version of Carrier Assault, which was called Titan Mode, is the fact that you actually had to work your way over to the enemy's Titan, in this case the carrier, and then get yourself into a position where you can actually assault their base. Now at this point, what essentially is occurring is that you get the enemy's base to 50%, and then you completely disregard all of the other capture points on the battlefield. Like, you may every once in a while see a couple of people still down on the conquest points trying to whittle down the enemy team's carrier that way, but usually everyone is either on offense trying to destroy or arm the MCOMs, or they're on defense trying to defend theirs. And I don't know if this is what DICE was trying to go for. Maybe they just wanted to make it so that the first part of the match was completely conquest oriented, and then the last half was a mix between rush, offense, and defense. If that's what they were going for, then I would say that they have succeeded 100%. But one of the things that I liked about the previous version is that you had so many more options in defending your base. Like, if you made it so that you couldn't just parachute on in, you would actually have to take a transport vehicle over to their carrier. And in that case, if you are on the conquest points and you don't want to bother with the rush aspect of it, but you want to make sure that the enemy isn't going to be able to take one of your objectives or one of the MCOMs in your carrier, then you can use rockets or you can use javelins and stingers to make sure that no transport vehicle is able to get to your base. That was a very key part of Battlefield 2142, and they've taken it away. But once again, like I've said, for the most part, like, it is so much fun. I've had some incredibly epic moments for this game mode, but that is one small thing that I'm not 100% sold on. Another thing I've been very impressed by is the way that they've gone about setting up the maps for Domination, because the maps for Domination on the vanilla maps are very small. They're very condensed. The objectives are basically on top of each other. And when you're playing on a 64-man server, things get a little crazy. I would say that they're way too small for 64 players. It's way too chaotic, and there's way too many people running around. But what they've done for the Naval Strike DLC, and also what they've actually done for the Second Assault maps, is that they basically expanded it to a point where it feels more like a Conquest small map, but with just infantry people, with infantry running around all over the place. And honestly, I love that. It makes it so that it feels like it's a much more Battlefield experience. You don't feel like you're just playing on a small little arena, and you have a lot more ways on approaching different objectives. And so, at least for me, I love what they've done with Domination, because it suits now a 64 player count. Like, before, I would say 32 people is a lot more suitable for the vanilla maps, but for Naval Strike and for, I would say, that the Second Assault DLC, because they've expanded the Domination maps to accommodate more people, I would say 64 players is now like the perfect amount for them. You still get that chaotic action when it's needed, it's still very fast paced, but at the same time, you can actually move from objective to objective and not just get shot at by 1,000 different directions. And so I really like what DICE has done so far with Domination. The one thing that I was very curious to learn about was how DICE went about balancing these maps around Rush, because as you guys probably know so far, Rush is not the most exciting game mode in Battlefield 4. A lot of the maps just aren't suited for it. They're not balanced around it, especially if you're playing on something like Silk Road. It's clear that they just had no intention in creating these maps to work for Rush. And so I wanted to know if that had changed in the Naval Strike DLC. And while I would say that there are a couple that are pretty challenging, especially if you're playing on offense, it feels like it's almost impossible. For the most part, I had a lot of fun playing on Rush. They give you plenty of different routes and avenues to flank your enemy, kind of catch them by surprise, move up onto the objectives. There's a lot of different vehicles that you can take advantage of when you're playing on offense. And while it's still probably going to take me many more hours to play on Rush, I've only been able to play probably for 5 hours just on that one particular game mode, so I haven't had the full experience yet. At least from the brief glimpse that I played so far, I would say Rush has been a success. Like I said, we are going to have to wait and see if it's just going to be awful. Maybe there's a couple of maps that will just be completely terrible, but so far I've liked what I've seen so far with Rush. But as for actual map design, I would say that DICE has completely hit this out of the park. One thing that I was very worried about with the Naval Strike DLC, and what made me so skeptical about it, is that I assumed it was going to be completely centered around vehicle and boat combat. I thought that there was only going to be a couple islands, I thought that it was going to be a lot of water, boats were going to be driving all over the place, but if you wanted to be down on the ground, you wanted to play with your primary weapon and actually shoot people with them, you were going to be out of luck. I could not have been more wrong with that idea. Like, honestly, the way that DICE has gone about balancing and designing these maps has been simply fantastic so far. Like, if you want to play as an infantry unit on any map, on any game mode, the way that DICE has gone about designing these maps, they've accommodated that type of playstyle. Like, if you want to play as an infantry, there is plenty of action here on the Naval Strike DLC. But what I've also been very impressed by is the way that they've gone about designing these maps around boat combat. Like, boats in the vanilla maps, I would say are decent. Like, if you're playing on Paracel Storm and you're in one of the attack boats, it can be a lot of fun, but one of the drawbacks of those maps is that there usually is not anything that you can hide behind. Like, if you're out on the high seas and you're getting locked on by a javelin, or people are shooting RPGs or SRAs at you, there isn't really anything that you can do to avoid that damage except for trying to move around as quickly as you can. But the way that they've gone about designing these maps is that there are a lot of obstacles that you can use to your advantage. Like, if you're playing on Wavebreaker, there are so many rocks that you can use to completely outplay your enemy. Like, if you see that there are a lot of enemies around an objective, instead of just exposing yourself like you would have to do on, say, something like Paracel Storm, you can dip in and out behind these rocks, shoot a bunch of, artillery downrange, take out as many as you can, and then once they start to try and lock onto you with their javelins or their RPGs, duck behind cover, repair your vehicle, and that simply wouldn't be possible on basically all of the vanilla maps in Battlefield 4. And so I love what they've done with the boat combat in the game, and simply just comes down to the map design. Like, if that wasn't in the game, if there weren't these obstacles that you could take advantage of, those opportunities wouldn't have been in there. And so I'm so glad that they finally added these obstacles into the game. And so overall, I have been very impressed with the Naval Strike DLC, and I think probably the biggest drawback right now is the amount of rubber banding that happens on some of these servers. DICE has said that they are trying to fix this issue as quickly as they can. I think that they're trying to improve or upgrade their server hardware so that rubber banding is no longer an issue. So cross our fingers that that's going to be resolved as soon as possible. But as for actual gameplay and map design, I think DICE has done just an exceptional job with this DLC. But I'd love to know what you guys think so far about Naval Strike. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know down below in the comments section. But until tomorrow, guys, have a good one and take it easy.